I'd love to get your help defining a phrase, just, I suppose, explaining a phrase, and then segueing into a conversation around mental models and cognitive biases and so on. So ordinary moments determine your position, and your position determines your results. So what is meant by that line, and what is meant by position?
So the counterintuitive insight that I had about decision making from studying sort of Buffett and Munger and Peter Kaufman and a host of other people who've influenced my thinking is that they almost never find themselves out of position. And if you want to think of it as position as your circumstances, they're never forced by circumstances into doing something that they don't want to do. And often that means they look like an idiot in the short term, but in the long term, they win. And if you consider Buffett, for example, as we've talked about, he closes down his partnership during a bull market in the 60s because he doesn't know how to invest anymore. He's lost touch. He can't find what worked for him. He reopens it later in terms of Berkshire Hathaway. Time magazine, I think it was 1999, he's on the cover as being out of touch. 2001 stock market bursts. Right now, today, I think as of last quarter, he's got $150 billion on the balance sheet. And so what he's always doing is everybody thinks he's out of touch and he looks like an idiot, but he always wins because no matter what the outcome is, he wins. If the stock market goes up, he wins. If the stock market crashes, he wins because he's put himself in a position where no matter what happens, he can take advantage of circumstances rather than having circumstances take advantage of him. And I think that that's a key element we don't realize. If you put Warren Buffett in a bad position where all of his options are bad, it doesn't matter how smart he is. It doesn't matter how Warren Buffett he is. Everybody looks like an idiot when they're in a bad position, and everybody looks like a genius when they're in a good position.
You could then create that position by having a handful of commandments. And I'm making these up. I'm not saying this is what Buffett does because I haven't tracked him as closely as you have. But for instance, I know someone who's cut from a similar cloth, and he's like, no short positions, no leverage, and he has 4 or 5 rules that he follows, which means he doesn't always beat the S&P 500, let's say, but he's very rarely in a position where he's a distressed seller or is forced into a bad position, right? So he's able to play a very long game. So I guess please keep going, but I'm wondering how you consistently create that type of position.
So let me talk about it in terms of finance and then apply it to something else that's totally, you would think it doesn't apply to. So in finance, like you can think of low debt, you can think of saving money, you can think of always having dry powder. It doesn't matter if you have the best idea in the world. If you can't take advantage of that idea, you might as well not have the idea. You have to be in a position to take advantage of the ideas that you have. And you have to be in a position where somebody can't sort of like call you in at the exact wrong moment because that's really expensive, as everybody sort of learned during the great financial crisis and is now forgotten. We seem to relearn these lessons over and over again. But positioning applies to so many other things that we don't think about. And you can think about it basically as in your sleep, right? Did you work out? Are you healthy? Are you eating well? Are you investing in your relationship with your partner? What position am I in the moment that I get into a fight or argument or disagreement with my partner or my spouse? And we don't think about the position we're in at that moment. But if you imagine that there's a patch of grass between you and them, is that grass dry or is it wet? Have I watered that for months, in which case the spark isn't going to light it on fire? Or is this smallest little spark going to start this forest fire? And the position that we bring into those arguments matters a lot in terms of the quality of the outcomes that we get. And I'll give you another example. We were talking about kids earlier, and I assume a lot of people listening have kids.
Mm-hmm.
One of my kids came home with an exam and he got a really terrible mark, and he hands it to me. He's like a teenager, so he like hands it to me. He's like, I did the best I could, walks away. And normally the conversation ends there. And I was like, okay, well, now is not the moment that we're going to talk about this because I know I've got this teenage attitude thing going on, but we're going to circle back to this. And so later that night, I was like, talk to me about what it means to do the best you can. And what he told me about the best he could was like, When he sat down to write that test from 10 to 11, he focused all of his energy and all of his effort on it. He made the best decisions possible from 10 to 11. But what he forgot or didn't really appreciate is what position was he in at 10 a.m. when he sat down to write that test? Did he fight with his brother in the morning? Yep, he did. Did he eat a healthy breakfast? Nope, he didn't. Did he get a good night's sleep? Nope, he was up late. Did he study? No, he sort of half-assed it. And so what happened was he was in a bad position at the moment he sat down to write that test. He was ill prepared to write the test. But yes, he did the best he could in that moment. And so often we think about life in terms of how do I do the best I can in this particular moment, rather than how do I put myself in the best position? And part of that is like we're always predicting. We're predicting creatures. And so we're always trying to gauge what the outcome is and maximize towards that outcome. I want to go all in on Tesla. I want to go all in on whatever because I want to maximize my return. And what we don't think about is like, okay, well, what is the cost of doing that? What if I'm wrong? And how do I position myself for multiple possible futures where what if my idea is not correct? Can I still survive? And can I thrive on that? And if you look back and you sort of like look back at Carnegie and Rockefeller and all these, historical people who built these great businesses, including Buffett, they always take advantage of a weakness in somebody else's position when their position is strong.
Who else would you, and I know you mentioned a few names, but outside of Buffett and Munger, who else would you put on your short list? And not to make you pick favorites, I'm sure that you could give a very long list, but just off the cuff, if you had to pick 5 to 10 people, let's just say. Could be 4, but let's aim for 5 or slightly more people who you really respect as incisive, deliberate decision makers. Who would make that list?
So we have a mutual friend, Naval Ravikant. He would be up there. Patrick Collison would sort of be up there. Kat Cole, who works at Athletic Greens.
Yeah, totally.
One of my favorite people. She's always one step ahead. She's amazing. I think that there's very few people who are well positioned in everything. Like if you look at somebody who's extremely good at one thing, like Buffett, that comes with extreme weaknesses. But you can have a list of exemplars in your head almost of different people who are good at different positions. But you have to pick what direction you're going. And then what positions do you need to be good at to be good in that direction? And so for me, like I circle back to sort of like core things, right? Which people don't really think about, but they're core to everything we do in terms of like health and relationships and friendship and purpose and community. Am I working on something that I want to be working on? Am I moving closer to my destination? And is my destination the place I want to go? And I think those questions are stuff that we don't really ask ourselves. We're always so focused on like, how do we accomplish the outcome we want rather than what are the key elements to this process that allow me to play for a long time? Am I going in the right direction? And do I want to get to where I'm going?
So I am going to come back to just the broad question of how to incorporate thinking about cognitive biases, if I'm saying that correctly, or mental models. I'm not really, I guess those are different. I'd love to have you, let's begin there. How would you distinguish or define mental models? And then I'm going to go micro and then we'll zoom out.
So a great way to think about mental models is the source of all bad decisions is blind spots. Mental models allow you to see a problem through a different lens. You can look at the problem you can adopt a different persona. A great example of a mental model is like, how would Tim Ferriss think about this? And then I adapt like what I know about you and I try to see the problem from your perspective. And if I can see the problem from your perspective, now I've done the one thing that actually gets me out of cognitive biases, which is the source of all cognitive biases are basically, we believe that we're part like what we see is all there is. And we learn about this sort of in physics, right? In grade 9, I think, where you're standing on this train and you're carrying this ball and the train is moving at 60 miles an hour. And how fast is the ball moving? Well, relative to you, the ball's not moving. But if you're watching the train go by, the ball's moving at 60 miles an hour. And so the source of all of our problems is that we only see that we're this person on the train holding this ball. And we can't see that there's a person outside who has a completely different view into the exact same situation that we see. So we can mentally use these tools to sort of accommodate how we can look into the world from a different person's eyes or through a different lens, be that biology or through thinking or through, I mean, the most useful ones tend to be like, and then what? Just asking yourself that simple question, I accomplished this, and then what? Then what happens? Inversion, right? How do I avoid all these negative outcomes that I don't want to get? And the Stoics, you've talked about this in the past. The Stoics have been doing this for a long time. They call it a premortem. I think that those are just really helpful ways. And what they're really doing is they're just allowing us to put a different lens onto the problem and see it through a different light. And by seeing it through a different light, we slightly reduce our blind spots into the problem.
Yeah, totally. I've found some of, I haven't read these in decades, so caveat lector for anyone who picks these up, but some of Edward de Bono's work, I think he's originally Maltese, but so de Bono's 2 words, or actually he may just be a Maltese citizen. I can't peg the nationality. It doesn't really matter. He wrote a book called Lateral Thinking. He has another one, I think it's called The 6 Thinking Hats or something along those lines, which similarly very helpful just for forcing yourself as a portion of a practice to look at the same situation with a different lens, a different set of questions, a different perspective.